Welcome to Dialogues with Masters, where we are fortunate enough to spend time with some of the most internally technologically advanced beings on the planet, who in addition to developing extraordinary skills, have also strived to develop a profound sense of wisdom and maturity. Because of this very important foundation being laid out, these brilliant beings use their abilities with utmost responsibility and reverence for the evolution of mankind. Today's guest is a wonderful example of this in action, so sit back, take it all in, feel free to ask any questions you may have in the comment section below, and enjoy. Today's guest is a dedicated member of the Circle of the Angelic Realms who serves as a vessel for Archangel Mikha'el, referred to within the circle as Mikha'el. She's committed to Mikha'el's mission of preparing humanity and the planet for the next steps in this new era. The mission is fulfilled through events that offer messages, spiritual inspiration, and healing to individuals and communities, facilitated not only by Mikha'el, but also by greater beings and masters. Her journey into spirituality began in 2010, following a profound spiritual emergence. At the time, she was on a conventional career path as an agnostic software developer and IT project manager. This awakening led to an embrace of the feminine divine and the role of Mikha'el's vessel. This resulted in her pursuing and earning a master's degree in philosophy and religion from the California Institute of Integral Studies, specializing in women's spirituality, with a focus on the healing arts. Additionally, she acquired 2 years of education at Psychic Horizons in San Francisco, leading to a certification as a Reverend in intuitive energetic healing. Since 2012, she has been using her intuitive, energetic healings, dedicating herself to providing spiritual services for the well-being of others. Please join me in welcoming Alice Martin. Alice, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm so excited to have your insights shared with our viewers and listeners. And I would love to start off with a question that I have asked previous guests and I plan to ask future guests as well. And that is, what is consciousness to you?
That's really a good question. It's an important question going forward in our understanding. I find consciousness as a fundamental basis of existence. In a way, that basis is oneness. It's divine source. How it shows up, how it can sort of be the building blocks for reality, for sentience, for, there's different ways that there's different viewpoints. Different ways that I see it, different perspectives in how consciousness kind of builds into that. So that means for me, everything is consciousness. Now, does that mean that there's complicated sentience and and full on awareness? There's levels of that. It just depends on energetics, beings, complexity of beings. But I'm of the school that even a rock or a table or a car has some form of consciousness. And but in that sense, even if you're, practicing psychic abilities, you're not going to be able to ask the car and say, what do you think of the baseball team Giants or the Warriors, and it's going to give you a cogent answer on that. So, but is there something that can be connected to? Yes. So, and that's kind of my starting point for a lot of what I see or view, and how I think about things.
So essentially, it's a connection and encompasses and essentially an all-knowing.
Yes, I mean everyone has. It's the definition of like oneness as I see it.
Absolutely.
Um, and there's a sort of an analogy that came to me years and years ago. I kind of see it like we're like a bowl of oatmeal where there's like small lumps and big lumps, but the whole thing is oatmeal. But you can distinguish different lumps within the oatmeal. And so some are more complex than others, but it's still all oatmeal. So that's kind of how it's a rough analogy of how I kind of see
Yeah,
things.
no, absolutely, absolutely. No, it's very interesting to hear your perspective as well. Just knowing just how deep down you have gone into the whole intuitive realm, really. So to mix that with the understanding that you have, I think is a phenomenal combination, and it's something that I would love to actually ask you about next. Is how you went from this left brain oriented kind of perception while being in a software development career. You're also a project manager in IT. Uh, and how did you really become so adept with these right brain, quote unquote, skills? These intuitive skills that include things like sensing energy, energy healing, channeling, embodiment, having the wisdom to be in tune with your heart center and making that a such a large aspect of your being. I mean, can you share that with us? What was that? What was that transition like, and what were some key moments that happened along the way?
Well, to be frank, it was a bit of a transition. And it wasn't something that I actively said, "Hey, I think I'm going to do this." What had happened is that I went through, actually, I was in a high pressure job. And some things were just not working out well for me. Um, and I ended up going through a mental breakdown, essentially. And in healing, trying to heal from that mental breakdown and trying to, like, it was what had happened, it felt like my soul had shattered, and I was trying to piece together pieces of myself. And in doing so, all of a sudden things started happening where I started feeling energies, and coming from the agnostic background that I was, and in my own rejection, because I grew up as Catholic, but I had rejected Catholicism by the time I was 14. And so going into that, I thought I was just like sort of backsliding, going into some craziness. And so, in a way, I kind of went kicking and screaming into some of this. But pivotal points that made it clear that this was something more um, was there. I spent a lot of times at the beach to try to just like, okay, all I have to do is be here. I just have to be here right now and just exist for another moment. But I was having a lot of trouble that day. I was feeling somewhat suicidal, to be honest. And so there was a moment when I was staring at the ocean, and I was like, I could just walk down into the water and not come back. And I was really open to that idea. But then all of a sudden, I kind of felt this voice that says, no, that's not for you to do. Or, what did it say? It was like, I have more to do. So that's not my path. And I'm like, and I was so distraught that I didn't real it. I wasn't shocked that there was, like, I was getting a communication. I was just like, yeah, but I'm feeling so awful. I'm in so much emotional pain right now. And it was like, this will pass. Just but you're here for something more. And so I remember walking up to the ocean and right on the edge, and all of a sudden just having a heart opening. Like I was just like, I'm not going to walk into the ocean and die. And it was just like, no, I guess I'm going to. And all of a sudden there was a heart opening, and I could feel like this incredible connection. And then I heard the ocean just sort of give me some honoring or something. It said hello to me. And so I was in that for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden I was like, what the F? It's like, what's going on? And I'm like, am I crazy? And I was so like, what? I went back and sat down, and I was like, no, that couldn't have just happened. And so, that was a pivotal point. And actually that was in the summer of 2009, but it wasn't until 2010 in January where things really broke open. So that was the other pivotal point. Was there was a couple before that, because there was a bunch of synchronicities that happened. But in regards to the actual spiritual emergence for myself in 2010, all of a sudden one day it was just like, I don't know, just everything just started breaking open. I started having visions of angels. Things were talking to me. I had Mikha'el saying, "You are my vessel." I started having telepathic communications with other individuals. And I was just, oh my goodness. Again, that was a point where I thought, I'm insane and they're going to lock me up and this can't be. So in all of that, there was this process of, no, really, I'm having a spiritual awakening. And so because of synchronicities, I found ways. I found a sort of a spiritual center in San Francisco, her church, that kind of helped, say, no, you're okay. You're not insane. I found Psychic Horizons, which was like, no, you're just having a spiritual awakening. Let us teach you some tools. And then, and through all of that, there was this thing that happened like, oh, I'm not going back to doing programming again. I need to go into a different place. It's like, yeah, go here. Don't stay there. Go here. And I'm like, really? What am I even supposed to do with that? How am I gonna? And and I had a house. I had I had economic status. And it was like, what? So all of that was it was a process that was very painful at times, and it took like a huge leap of faith, because in the end, and this goes for anybody, a lot of times, and hindsight is 2020. When I look back at my life, I can see all the signs that were trying to point me in this direction. But I was like, what am I thinking? No, whatever. I'm so ensconced in corporate, capitalistic, materialistic kind of viewpoints, and materialism as a philosophy, that the universe is made of stuff, and that there's not, the spiritual stuff is, doesn't really, how does it connect? It doesn't, or something. That's a very kind of off the cuff, irreverent answer from me in regards to that philosophy. But I look back on it, and I was very much, and from a patriarchal viewpoint, also. So this power over structure, so it was trying, because I look back, I could see, wow, there were these signs and this kind of nudging, but because I was so ensconced and had all this programming embedded within me, it was like I wasn't receiving the messages. I was really not allowing them to be received. So it took this sort of, breaking down and breaking open and breaking apart in order to let go of how I saw myself in my life. And, and as people are going through their lives now, what, in a way, that's for people who can walk that path, who can sort of see it, hopefully not everybody has to like go through a total breaking of the soul, but it does take a bit of breaking apart of what you assume to be how you see reality, how, being open to maybe how I initially perceive something isn't all there is, and maybe there's a different way of looking at it, and maybe there's more to me than just my physical sense of being. Even there may be more to me even than my connection to being human in this moment. So, because that's a default. I mean, next first is like we're individuals, and then it's this sense of, well, I'm human and I'm part of the human race, and or and it could be even subdivided. Well, I'm a part of this ethnic race, and that's my lineage. And so, and it's not to discount that, because again, you, ethnic lineage, no matter who you are, how that is, ancestors are specific. They're real but they're real in your connection to being human, which being human is a temporary situation. It's not all that you are. It's a chunk of your awareness right now, because you're in it being human, and that includes your ancestors, your physical ancestor lineage. That includes the context of whatever society and culture you're in. All of that is embedded. But then you also have a spiritual lineage. You have a spiritual lineage. Like, where do you come from in your spiritual lineage? How have you evolved? Where are you at in that journey from there? And what's the context of that part? And so, when we start to look at all these things, again, kind of jumping into, not to segue into something else too soon, but it's just all the stuff that is going on right now. We have this technology threshold happening. There's more talk of extraterrestrials and UFOs and UAPs. There's also more stuff in science that really confirms, or really some of the theories are starting to solidify about what is reality and consciousness. There's more talk now, more serious talk of multiverses, of being able to access time, and what on a quantum level. There's experiments now that light, it's seen that quantum particles can go back in time when they are observed, to make sure that what is happening, it stays true. So there's been these experiments. Now, I'm not an expert in all of this stuff, but I, like everybody else, I'm just paying attention to what's happening. So so that shift from left brain to right brain, depending on who you are, what your context is, and also your willingness. So are you willing to go through this journey of uprooting all that you thought was real to go into this other direction? That takes a lot. And for a lot of people, that's just too scary monsters for them. And they just don't want to go in that direction. And so those who are courageous, or, those that can stick with it, yeah, there is a way for you to understand who you are. There is a way for you to develop your own unique skills and abilities, and to see that having access to spiritual information, having access to psychic skills, that's not like, oh, special people or weirdness. That's actually the norm. When we really, it's the norm. Us shutting down and being confined to this sort of, we're just individuals, we're just this one human experience, and that's it. That's the totality of who we are. That's a false narrative. But going alluding to something else, that's a false narrative that is serving other powers and forces, that it serves them to maintain a power over structure, to have the masses of the human collective consciousness believe this.
Absolutely. No, beautifully put. And, there's so much there to get into at a deeper level. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I'd also like to just clarify for our viewers, when we say from left brain to right brain, doesn't just mean that, you know, that one aspect of perception is being utilized. We're saying that essentially that opened up the perception that that right brain typically is associated with. And Alice, being already skillful with her left brain perception and processing, really was able to make use of all that additional information that she was receiving with her newfound intuition and all of these skills that opened up after her experience. And I find it absolutely fascinating that you were able to handle all of this intuitive information in such a productive manner, because a lot of times that information can be too much for a lot of folks who have not prepared themselves for receiving that sort of information. And I think that was one aspect that I personally, at least in my journey, tried to make sure that it isn't as big of a challenge as it can be, because there's oftentimes when the, because because of the nature of information that you're receiving, and the copious amounts of information that you're receiving from that intuitive perception that we have, it's very hard to be able to discern that information, which is something you've worked on for a long time. And you're now able to discern this information at a level not many of us can do. So I'm curious, as far as your experiences go when picking up this intuitive information, whether it's this whether it's messages that you're receiving, any sort of visuals that you might have. I'm curious, what is your experience when you receive this information, especially now that you are able to discern it more so than you were before? I'm curious, what is your experience like when you receive information intuitively?
Well, it's a good question, because so often, so going back to some of this left brain, right brain thing, um, you know, the left brain, which is logic and analysis, so part of my stuff was that something would happen. I would get a vision, or I would hear something, or you get information. And so immediately my left brain, which, is just trying to help, but sometimes it's trying to help too much. It's over programmed, And so it would go into this thing about, okay, this is ridiculous. What am I even, this is nonsense. How do I make it up? But in a way also, though, again, relying on left brain, there's a process of like, okay, what's my evidence for this? How do I, there are a lot of times when it's just going too much. So it's actually causing, I would go through cycles of just being in such conflict and going into internal conflict and emotional pain over it, that I wouldn't just accept what I'm receiving. And I would want to, but then there are times when some of that analysis and logic comes into play, because then you can sort of like discern, okay, what does this feel like, as opposed to when this happens? Where's the evidence that there's, this confirms to something? And, where can I see a pattern in all of this? So for me, I rely a lot on my analytics, in helping me deal with that. But I need to make sure I'm not going overboard, because then what happens is I go into conflict. So in experiencing a lot of this stuff, sometimes it happens almost like you're just having an imagination. Like, oh, I'm just thinking of something, and then all of a sudden something happens, and you're like, wait a minute, where'd that come from? And, so it's so easy. It's so super easy to dismiss it as you just had a random thought that came out of nowhere. But with me in my own spiritual emergence, it was like insistent. It was like constant. It was like, no, you're having a vision and you can't close your eyes and then open them and have it go away. And and the information is consistent. So even though I would get like a piece of information on this one day, maybe on the next day I get another piece of information. But if I go into my my left brain, and now it's consistent. It doesn't change. It adds on to. So when we're looking at our internal experience, there's this thing about discerning and understand, and also, and many sort of gurus and teachers speak to this, about the power of thought. And so it's almost like even your imagination is something. Just because you're imagining it doesn't mean anything. That isn't somehow a conjuring or something real.
It's all information.
It's all information. So what happens is that there's, at least from my perspective, there is a constant sense of how to, and this is where Psychic Horizons kind of help me, a constant coming back to center, being in a space of neutrality and non-judgment. So I'm trying very hard, even though I'm always like saying this is ridiculous and I'm being sarcastic and I'm, this is gobbledygook, this is a bunch of woo, whatever, what does it mean to me? I could go on and on about that. But then, I remember and use my tools of how do I come back to center? How do I remember to be in non-judgment? And then how do, and being in non-judgment doesn't mean you don't judge or discern. So what's the power of discerning is to being able to see and listen and identify like differences. And that doesn't mean you need to categorize it immediately either, to label it. Because a lot of this stuff, when you're getting information, initially there may be no way to put it into a human, linear, 3D context. A lot of times we want to put our knowledge base of being human and slap that on it. Like, based on my family dynamics and family dynamics that I've seen over here and some other things that I've seen over there, this looks like this as you're getting information. You have to be careful about just being open to whatever is coming up for you and not automatically placing, I heard somebody call it, I think a remote viewer, actually. They called it, and this is really good, and like an analytic overlay on it. So you're allowing the information to come, and even though it doesn't make sense, like, why am I seeing some like triangles, and why is there this fluffy thing over there, and how does that have to do with anything? Like, I'm seeing this other person over there, and I know there's a connection, but we want to go into our analytics, the left brain, and make sense of it. And this is where we, as much as we can, we hold off. And that is the training. So a lot of this stuff about meditation, a lot of this stuff about using tools, all that's doing is helping you unlearn some of this programming that keeps you blinded. And it gives you a better way to suss out your own particular information. So, actually, I just went on a tangent, I think, and I forgot your initial question, but
No, That was a great, absolutely great. Those were great insights, and honestly, I think you did a wonderful job just really getting to some of the core aspects of really how you were able to develop this discernment, and take that information and really make sense of it, because there's that state that one needs to be in, as you mentioned, and then from there to be able to let go of our human conditioning and essentially remove our lenses of memory, and see things for what they are. It is a skill, it's in itself, and
Right.
uh, it's wonderful that you touched on that, because there's so much information that we are sometimes unknowingly receiving, and at the same time reacting to, not
Yeah.
even responding to, but
Yes.
reacting to that.
Exactly.
It's more relevant than ever now with social media being available to learn these sorts of fundamental aspects of intuitive knowing, um, that we are very careful with what we are sensing and how we are responding to it, and that we're not reacting to this information.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of, and again, it does it however you can get to it, whether you go to a psychic school, whether you learn, transcendental meditation. It doesn't matter what, what the spiritual technology is. What matters is how do you, one, unlearn some of the programming that's been embedded, being a human in this particular society, but also gaining spaciousness and distance from, so that you don't always say, you know, as you're in a bed of confusion or whatever's happening, you identify so fully with that happenstance instead of gaining some distance so that you can see the happenstance and not identify with it. That happens, acceptance of who you are, which is part of my biggest thing, even now. I mean, bless you for saying, all these wonderful things about me, but I still struggle. I still struggle with my own doubts. I still struggle with who I am and this whole thing about being a vessel and the Archangel Michael. It's like Michael. It's like, are you kidding me? What? Who? I'm a vessel? And so that kind of thing, I'm receiving the information. It's consistent when I go to the center of who I am as best I can within heart space or the center of your head, and I'm in a non judging space. When I ask me and listen to me on a deep level, I hear, yes, this is true. And anybody can start to hear that for themselves if they can figure out or use tools to lessen the noise around them. And that's the goal, is how do you lessen and discern the noise and not feel like the noise is you. Again, that's that separation. And so so the skill is the discerning, going into your own sense of knowing what the noise is, of whether it's, energetic programming or blocks from family, from institutions, from even friends, from culture. It's discerning, oh, these are informations from that is not really me as in totality of being. Let me listen to me and see what my information is, and then let me be with accepting that this is the information I'm receiving, even though it sounds bonkers. And that is the big ask, is that discerning of what's you and what's not you, and
So
just gaining that separation and then going into acceptance, because a lot of times when you start really deeply listening to yourself, you have a lot to say, and sometimes it's not always what you want to hear.
yeah, there's so much to unpack there, especially with regards to to understanding when you're picking up on someone else's energy. You mentioned
Right.
family, you mentioned folks that you work with or you interact with. And in my personal experience, it wasn't until, you know, as pretty much relatively recently, and more recently than I would care to admit, but really, it was an understanding that I had that, hey, when I am at this particular location, I am around a particular type of energy, what I'm feeling may not necessarily be coming out of me. That's something that is something that needs to be learned how to actually be dealt with properly, and
Right.
that's something that I think is affecting more people out
Yes.
there than I think is really actually understood at the moment, or than a lot of people really know. So I think this is
That goes into
incredibly
that reaction
sure.
that you talked about earlier, because people go on automatic. They don't know that they're on automatic. They identify themselves as something with the noise and whatever. They're not realizing how they're in this automatic reaction. And in a way that takes away from themselves their own sense of freedom of choice,
So,
and which is important because we are constantly presented with choice. We have free will. That's fundamental to this universe. We have free will. We have choice. But if we're not understanding the choices that are being presented to us, if we can't see them for what they are, we're going to be on automatic. And in a way, we're creating our own deterministic kind of universe going on, that will, self-fulfilling prophecies. So as you're talking about going into these spaces, and if you want, we can go into what it means, and to understand your own sense of who you are, also your own sense of barriers, your own sense of boundaries, because that's important. There's energetic boundaries. What are
absolutely.
permission levels? That's also important. All of that comes into this. And as you move into spaces where there's heavy stuff going on, that understanding that you are protecting yourself, or that you may have some spirit guides, however you want to see that, as helping you protect yourself. When you start to get to that level, you will realize that you can go anywhere and know that you're protected. But it takes being understanding what is you and what is not you, what is your boundaries, and where are permission levels. Because a lot of times, if nothing can hurt us, attack us, or influence us unless we're giving it permission on some level, in some way. And so once we have an understanding of that, then, and it's not to say that it's easy, because as we had in our recent event, we had Lord Ganesha come through, as an embodiment. And one of the things that he was talking about, in his own way, is about protections. And he says, in this day, in this time, in this now, it's really hard, even for those who have skills, who know about how to protect themselves, because it's as if you wash yourself and you get clean, and you're in your house, and then you go outside and there's smog and there's soot and people are throwing dirt at you. And so you can't just say, oh, I cleaned myself once and now you're clean for all of this human existence. It's like right now, it's especially dirty. It's especially toxic. So you always have to remind yourself, you go out and now you're filled with some filth, and who knows what happened. And maybe some things came in. So you need to, when you get home or get into a safe space, then you clean yourself off. And you have to do that. Otherwise, even for someone like me, not to say I'm anything special, but I do have a lot of tools that I can utilize. But even for somebody like me, it's very easy. I just had it actually the other day. I went to someone's house to help them out to do to packing some boxes, and they were very spiritual people and stuff. So you wouldn't think that there's anything there, but what ended up happening is that the next day I realized when I left, I kind of got a small hitchhiker that was affecting me. And so, but I, once I actually sat and said, okay, what's going on? Why is this happening with me? I could feel into discern what's me, what's not me, and say, oh my goodness, really? I got a hitchhiker from that place? Why would that? But then I ended up getting a lot more information as to why that happened. But the important thing was, why did I allow it? And some of that was that I just let my guard down. I thought, you know, like I was invalidating some of my own stuff. And this is how things can attach to you, because you're invalidating some of your own information, or there's a part of you where, like, well, I'm kind of this, but I don't know if I look, I'm kind of embarrassed about it. And, that's an invalidation of what you know to be true. If you know it to be true, and there's still a part of you that's like, well, in this context of, corporate America, using that as an example, I would be a laughing stock, you know, and or materialist scientists, which I also identify with, because I wanted to go into AI technology when I was in my 20s, and I wanted to study quantum physics. I had full intention of going in that direction, and so I
think people
identified.
sometimes,
Go ahead.
absolutely, and I think I just want to add real quickly here. I think people forget that true science and true spirituality are essentially the same thing. What you're
Yes.
doing is you are looking to discover reality at its deepest being. It's at its deepest levels, and so essentially you're going out to do the same thing. Now scientific institutions, that's another story, because then
Yes.
you're dealing with organizations,
Yeah.
you're dealing with agendas and various things, and so you're absolutely right. I mean, I can imagine that a lot of folks who are in such progressive industries that are moving at such fast pace, especially in technology, have a very similar, at least curiosity, level of curiosity, and that willingness to look at things the way they are, and then also create. And there's certainly overlap there. So it's very interesting that you were also thinking about going to that AI industry, and you have that interest. I think that although it is interesting, it isn't surprising in a lot of ways. So anyway, I just wanted to add that little tidbit, but please continue.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of times when there's such a separation. There's science, and then there's spirituality, and that, as you're pointing out, there's a lot of overlap. And if you allow yourself to be open to it, this thing about materialism, there's a reason why this, that it's gotten to that. What am I trying to say? I'm losing my words. Gotten to that point. There's a reason. In a way, a lot of this is about, again, invalidation and disempowering of humans, of human collective consciousness, individuals on a human level. If you keep a person disempowered, you have more control over them. If you retain more knowledge of a bigger picture than this other person, you have more power. And so a lot of this, when it comes to even like scientific institutions, religious institutions, a lot of this is about how to retain power and control the masses, whatever the masses may look like. And that is a false narrative. Like, just like this thing about spirituality and science can't go hand in hand, and they can't inform each other. They can. It's a false narrative that they're completely separate. And
Absolutely.
exactly.
I see them as the same thing. You're looking at reality and you're trying to understand it.
You're
It's
trying to understand it. And it's just a way to, like, what's the tool? How can you know, they can go hand in hand. Like I said, one can inform the other. You're looking at it more in an empirical way, more in a logical way, in order to understand a little bit more objectively why something is the way it is. But then how can you use a more spiritual, intuitive way to give you deeper insight into something that you may come up against a brick wall on? Like, or something that seems paradoxical. I mean, it's funny to me sometimes. I had this thing where I wrote this paper. Because my memory is bad, so I'm gonna probably screw some of this up. But um, there's a particular, and I forgot his name. There's a particular in materialism. There's the what do you call that? The mind body problem. Where they're trying to make this connection between, okay, we know there's kind of mind, but then there's physical, and from a materialism viewpoint, there's this paradox. Oh, it's a paradox that there's this mind and then there's body. How do they interact? They're trying to jump through, and it's funny because they'll look at some of the spiritual stuff. It's like, oh, you're trying to jump through all these hoops to explain something, you know. That to explain something that we think is ridiculous. And it's like, no, but you're doing the same thing. The amount of hoops that some of these philosophers and even scientists will do to justify keeping it such a material, that the universe is made of stuff, when obviously going forward, I mean, it's more and more, no, the universe is vibrational. You go down to the quarks, you go down, 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 all you're getting is vibration. So it's never made of stuff. So even from a scientific viewpoint, but they still want to add on, they want to still confine it to that way. And so, I did this paper pointing that out when I was doing my graduate work. And it was kind of eye opening for me, which is why I'm bringing it up now, of how they're clinging to the paradox. And then they're not, they're like scratching their head. How is this so? It's such a paradox. Whereas, like, okay, if you just look at it from consciousness is the foundation of our universe, it would solve your problem right there. It would make sense. It would make sense. But a lot of these scientists they can't go there. They just can't go there. They have to create their own hoops and jumping through and moving the goalposts in order to keep to this materialistic viewpoint. They tie themselves in knots, some of them.
Absolutely. And I find that pretty surprising, just given the general outlook that a scientist should have, which is one of curiosity, openness, taking in information instead of just structuring information without it being complete. Um, and I think a lot of that, and you would know better than myself, is I think a pushback from from institutions, from academia as well, to really stay within the parameters of these boundaries that have been set, as you're mentioning, and not go beyond this materialistic plane. Even though, if you look at some experiments that even the government was carrying out, particularly the Gateway experiment,
Exactly.
which actually looked into remote viewing as well as other psychic intuitive abilities that we all actually do have, then you realize, hey, there might be a reason that they were researching these sorts of things, and they were far more successful than people realize and care,
Yeah.
actually know. So as you mentioned earlier, these are innate abilities in which we can develop, and at the same time, we need to understand the importance of, as you mentioned, being in our heart centers, having the right intent before developing and utilizing these sorts of abilities. And I'm just curious, what is your take on that, and how can one develop themselves to, number one, keep their intent in the right in the right place as far as using these abilities? And also, number two, how can one protect themselves from the types of energies that we were discussing before? What are some methods that you would suggest to protect yourself? And again, how would one go about kind of creating that intent, which is true to what the collective is looking to do?
One of the biggest things, it's so funny because, as I've gone through my own spiritual journey and awakening and gaining information, there's a lot of platitudes that were platitudes, like love is all, and, all that stuff. And it was funny, there were certain times when, what was it? Like love is power, or it is what it is. That's another one. Where there are moments that in the spiritual journey, all of a sudden you see deeper into that. It's not just a platitude. It's not just a saying that you can throw out. It actually means something, and it goes deep. And in doing, in understanding some of these things that seem, yeah, that's just a throwaway line, or that's just platitude, or how does love gain power? How is love power? Or you have to look at yourself. It all comes back to how do you be with yourself? How do you honor yourself? And it's coming back to self, but then it's also realizing that you're a part of a greater whole.
Absolutely. So your true self.
Your true self. Exactly. So once you can get into that idea that you're not just one individual and everything is separate from you. You're interwoven and interlaced and interconnected on so many different levels. Once you begin to step into that with more eyes open, a lot of that will then turn you back inward so that you can say, well, how do I heal? How do I understand myself more fully? How can I discern what's me and what's not me? Where are my blocks? How am I sabotaging my own good? How am I doing that? Because in essence, you begin to learn that you are doing everything. Nobody's doing anything to you. You are doing it to yourself, which is a hard pill to swallow. It's a big ask. I know, because I'm always going into like, why me? What's going on? I'm like running around with my hair on fire, saying, "Oh, it's the information. It's overwhelming, and do you realize how big this is?" And so I have to like call myself out every once in a while and say, "Alice, I'm creating my own stress here. I'm generating this stuff here. I am not being open to seeing what I really need to see about me." And then when I start to do that, then I start to be open to support, to energetic knowledge, to, it's funny. The moment I can fully, okay, I'm going to accept myself in this moment, all of a sudden I get more information. And anybody can do that. But that's the inward journey. That's the healing, and that's hard, because there's stuff, like I said earlier, there's stuff about you don't want to know about you, because it'll go deep. It'll go into the nooks and crannies of things that you thought you hid, or you thought, oh, I can blow past this. I already know it on another level. I don't need to really understand this because it's too icky, or it's embarrassing, or whatever it is. But in order to truly get there for yourself, to really be open, you have to sort of know what you know about yourself and be open to that knowing, and just and do healing work for it. So The other thing about, and this can lead to, and that leads to heart center, knowing that your spirit and your body in this manifestation. And so, how do you get affinity between your body? Because your body will have a way of seeing stuff. Your ego body will have a way of seeing stuff. Your spiritual body will have a perspective. And you kind of, then you start to work on how can I gain affinity and alignment to all of these different parts of myself so we're all on the same page. So all of that is just this internal work. And when you start to do that, then you start to understand what it means to have boundaries. Oh, this is my boundary. Oh, that's somebody else's boundary. And then you realize, oh, there's process. Oh, I'm in process right now. That other person's in process. And then you start to understand permission levels on whatever. So I wanted to keep to your question, so I was kind of going off on another thing because let me go on this tangent about permissions right now. Understanding what I learned, and I learned this through Psychic Horizons, but it could be known in different ways. I think also the biggest thing here is like there's no one way to understand a concept. It can be framed or learned in many different ways. So this isn't like you have to do it through this way and no other way. That's anybody tells you that's incorrect. And that goes to boundaries also, because if you allow somebody else to usurp your own knowing, you're giving away your own sense of agency. You're allowing them to violate your boundaries. So part of understanding and being able to discern what's you, what's not you, what's a block, what's you standing in your way. You may not be able to solve it right then, but at least discern it. Wow, I'm really standing in my own way right now. Yeah, I don't know how to tackle that, but at least I can see it. That in and of itself is healing. As you discern more and more, then you can tell, is this my information? Is that somebody else's information? If it's somebody else's information, they don't have permission to be in my energetic space. And that is a form of protection because you're solidifying your boundaries. Right now for so many people, they don't have boundaries. They're incredibly porous. They have like incredible holes in them that just things are attaching to them, and they've just wholesale given up a lot of their own sense of agency, and things are connecting to their power centers, but for them, they're the victim, which in some cases they are suffering. But unless they go inward to see how they're allowing their victimhood to perpetuate, which again is hard, they won't be able to gain back their own sense of agency and refortify their own boundaries. So it's a constantly, what's going on with me? It's a constant question so that you can tell, is this me? Is this coming? Am I suffering an anger or a resentment? Am I reacting to something that's outside of me? Or is this something coming into my space that's bothering me? And if it is, I can say you have no permission. Although if it stays, maybe there's something I have an agreement with in regards to this thing. And so how do I, break that contract? And so all of that, it's about reestablishing your own sense of agency and discernment about who you are. And a lot of that involves going deep and healing who you are, because a lot of that is a lot of what is happening. There is this toxic stuff, but a lot of reason why it's so effective is because it's hard for them to know the difference. They think they have no control. They have no sense of agency. They can't tell what's them and what's not them.
Full advice, and thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so fundamental what you just said. And I think one of the things, the takeaways there is how powerful intent is in keeping these energies at bay and outside of the boundaries that you've set for yourself. At the same time, understanding that it's better to be a creator than to just be reacting to what is going on around you. And therefore, healing, as you mentioned, is so important. And I think there's a lot of healing that needs to be done for almost everybody, as you mentioned. And that is really what's going to lead us to our optimal states. And I think people have this false notion of human beings being this evil, malevolent animal that's, out there just for himself. And, this is human nature to do this. It's human nature to be this way and be that way. And what I mean by that is usually there are negative connotations associated with that. But actually, if you look at a human being and its full potential with all of these issues taken away through healing, we're actually loving, compassionate beings that are part of the universe, just like everything else, and
Yes.
can live in unison and unity with everything around us. And it's really our choice as to what we want to
Yes.
be. As you said, as you mentioned, with what you said about essentially empowering yourself, is it's so fundamental that we look at how much power we truly have to shape our internal state, number one, and then eventually see that reflected in our external world.
Yes, exactly. That is really well put, because there is because the physical is so physical. It's so linear. It's so it, initially it feels so separate, right? But even when you look at the energetics of it, we're still not separate. But it's very easy to fall into that mindset. It's very easy. So understanding that everything is energetically based, everything is vibration, everything is consciousness. When you own your own sense of agency, and this, and this is a big, even I'm still trying to get to that place of owning my own sense of agency and power, then nothing can really hold you or trap you. And you see your connection to everything, your connection to the planet. I mean, there's more that, I can go off on this because there's a whole avenue of what is it, the human collective consciousness, the consciousness of the planet, how we're interwoven into the planet as humans. And this thing that you brought up regarding the specialness of humans, there's a reason why we're physical. Humans isn't, at least based on my information and what I've gotten, being human is actually a bit of a privilege, right? There are reasons why there are different types of forces that want to keep us unbalanced, want to keep us from our full potential, want to make it seem like, and even I am so guilty of this, of seeing humans as bad. We see so much horror and just inhumane treatment to humans and things around us, and it can be horrifying. It's traumatizing. And yet your point is very salient. It's very pointed. you know we as humans have access to a lot, and on a collective scale we are powerful, which is why so many forces, whether they're people forces, whether they're elites, whether they're institutions, whether they're beings of some sort, they want to harness, one, keep us, the collective consciousness of humanity, sort of in a pathological state, so that they can gain control over it. Because when you get control over the masses, you gain control over that collective conscious. You can harness the power of the collective. And that is the secret. there's a reason why people want to keep the masses contained. You can feed off of it almost, and some types of beings, in my understanding, literally do. But in order for them to do that, you have to give up your sense of agency. You have to align yourself, or you have to not see who you truly are. And so that you have no power, you can do nothing, that it's physical, somebody is hitting you with a bat, you can't escape, you can't, you're powerless. When, in a very real sense, that's not true. You can affect the world around you if you believe in who you are and you understand all that you are. You can affect things around you, and you can be and find your true alignment and protect and build your own protections with what's going on.
Absolutely. And choose not to suffer any external situation
Exactly. And
that you
choose
may be
not to
faced with,
suffer.
and hopefully use it as a learning opportunity.
Exactly. Yes.
I
All of
think
these are learning opportunities. These are learning opportunities to, one, not choose suffering, because as that famous quote, pain can happen, but suffering is optional. So that discernment comes in again. Where am I causing my suffering, as opposed to what is the pain of the moment? And if it's a pain, well, what am I learning from this? And, so that I can stop causing a continual suffering. Another example, actually, I love this. I had somebody tell me, a teacher once tell me, in regards to this, it's like when you get a slash on your hand. Suffering is like, oh my God, there's a slash. What am I going to do? I don't know what to do. Or why did I do this? This was so stupid. I was so stupid to get a slash on my hand. Oh my, and you're so busy railing on yourself, or railing how unfair it is that I have a slash on my hand. Now I can't do it. It hurts. Oh my God, it hurts. Instead of like, okay, what do? I need stitches. I should go to the doctor, get the stitches, have it cleaned out. Because if I don't, you're so busy railing, oh my God, how stupid am I? Or this was unfair that I should get this. Now your hand is infected because you didn't do anything about it.
right.
So now it's getting worse. So now you have to deal with that, take antibiotics, when if you just accepted the pain and the situation, even if you did something stupid, you were waving a knife around like a silly person, and then you slashed your hand. Just say, oh, wow, you know what? Here's a lesson. I was being silly by waving the knife around, and look what happened. You don't go in, or try not to go into, oh my God, I was so stupid, or see, I wasn't, nobody taught me. It's all somebody else's fault, that they should have taught me how to wield a knife. And so again, you're so distracted with that noise of invalidation and projecting judgment on somebody else, that you're not taking care of the hand, which can get more infected. Whereas if you take care of it and learn, what is the lesson? Well, maybe I was being silly. I should have respected the knife a bit more. Maybe I should have paid attention. Why was I doing that? Or, be in that and not judge it. Not judge that. Just say, this happened. This is my lesson. That's what I'm going to take from it. And oh, by the way, I need to get this hand looked at really quickly so that it doesn't get infected.
Great point. I think that's a wonderful thing that you just mentioned there. I have had personal experiences myself where I have tried to get individuals to see the importance of devising a solution instead of focusing on the problem, and, as you mentioned, reacting to it instead of responding to it. And I have come to an understanding that, based on our level of knowing, some folks it seems like compulsively want to be in that state of complaining. They want to be, they want to express those sorts of emotions, albeit in a way that isn't very conducive for growth and isn't very healthy. They don't really know what to do with that energy that they're experiencing, and therefore look for excuses almost to take those out. And it comes back to healing, and as you mentioned, understanding where these emotions truly are coming from, that they're not coming from this event. It's not coming from getting my hand, accidentally, cut, or any sort of other issue, but really has to do with how I'm responding to it and whether or not I can be as productive as possible with the choices that are in front of me. And I think you mentioned something else earlier, and I wanted to kind of speak to you about this also. Is folks, I think, forget about our greater existence, right? And what I mean by that is our almost, our greater timeline, which goes beyond just this one life, and the greater mission that we have, and that we've come to this world with, which is something that we really spent a good amount of energy devising before we actually came here. And so to understand that greater goal, and not just be fixated on this one lifetime that we have here and this one vessel or avatar, I think is something that I personally am trying to come in terms with as best as I possibly can. And I hope that, you know that's something that's more widely not just understood but worked with as well. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? The larger kind of goal, and the fact that we all come here really knowing sometimes what sort of relationships we might expect between people, what sort of dynamics we might be faced with, and therefore what sort of challenges that we're expected to overcome in a particular lifetime. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you kind of explained it pretty well. So I want to validate how you're expressing that. But what I will say is that is part of the challenge right now. You know, for a while, for the last several thousand, or say the last 1,000 years, I don't know. It seemed like as things have been moving and going, in a way, there's a bit of a luxury to just sort of keep your head in the sand and look at things. And that was utilized again, in my view, there's some forces that are around. What does that mean exactly? I could go into some of it, but there's forces that want to keep us unbalanced and want to keep humans themselves thinking in a more individualistic and one lifetime mentality. And because that serves a greater purpose for them. So in order to break, but we're getting to a point right now that, like I said, there's a convergence or a confluence of events that are happening. And we kind of need to, as a human collective, we kind of need to wake up, and we kind of need to get out of thinking of just being human in this one lifetime. And again, that's, for others, it's a big ask. It's they've invested, or they have they've invested so much in thinking of themselves in a certain way, of being, that to rip that apart, to make them more a part of, in a way, even though that gives them a greater sense of power. It's like you're taking a big fish in a small pond that really enjoyed being the big fish in that pond. And now you're saying, wait a minute, but the ocean's right over there. You can swim in the whole ocean and look at where you can go and what you're a part of. And all of a sudden there can be a fear of like, wait a minute, that means I'm going to be just this, again, this is a way of thinking. It's not as if you lose anything. In fact, you gain something by going into the ocean and intermingling with the oneness of the ocean, instead of just being limited to this small pond, being this elite sort of bully or power over situation, because that's temporary. It's temporary. A lot of times, there's so much put into this one lifetime that, like that saying about you can't take it with you. You can't take money with you. and what you think is like so massively important right now is almost meaningless once you move on to who you really are. And it's almost like, wow, I was really stuck on this one little thing that didn't have a lot of bearing, except it caused me so much angst. Now I've created more karmic baggage for myself. Also, I wasn't fully participating in human collective consciousness, to help, lighten that, or to bring more healing into that. I was trying to go that way, but I got distracted by all this noise, and I actually caused more karmic baggage for myself because I thought that was so important. And that realization, that waking up to, imagine that, you came for, I'm going to go and I'm going to serve humanity and the greaterness of universe. And then all of a sudden you get distracted by making money, and doing whatever you can to make money, when money in this is actually meaningless. Even in a human context, it's meaningless. Because when you understand yourself as having full agency and being in your power, you can, going into some of that law of attraction stuff, but that's part of like understanding your own sense of agency. You can manifest what you need. It doesn't have to look like money in order to get what is truly in alignment with you. But if you allow other forces, other talking heads, other institutions to say, you deserve this, this is what you should think, this is who you are, then all of a sudden you're in this life, and that is what's important. I went through a huge thing to be sort of vulnerable and honest. Part of when I was a software programmer, I had a house, I had a nice car, I had some economic status. Well, part of the down the down part, as I broke open, is I was starting to lose. And in losing that, I was losing the sense of myself. And it was like, well, if I'm not that, if I'm not this credit score, then I'm nothing in society. And so I had a thing where I was identifying, for example, with a credit score. And, if my credit score wasn't like this and it was starting to drop, then that means I'm nothing. The financial institutions think I'm nothing. I'm nothing in society. Nobody will talk to me. No business will talk to me. No business will help me out because I'm not good enough. And that is a fallacy. It's a false narrative. How can I uncouple from that notion and just know that I'm okay exactly as I am right in this moment? And that's for everyone to feel into. Right in this moment, you're okay. You're exactly where you need to be. And you're supported if you allow yourself to be supported. And it may look like money may come your way, and it may look like something else in support will come your way. But it's uncoupling what society and what institutions tell you should be, so that you can fully be in understanding of your own sense of power, and then know that you're bigger than just being this human, this one human in this one lifetime. that you may have been several humans in past lifetimes. And all of those were momentary, using the game analogy, momentary avatars. You were just playing a game for a while. You play a game for a while, and sometimes I like to play, my games. And I do a lot of, well, not so much anymore, but I do a lot. I like video games. So, I can go on, if I have the time and a good game, I can go through like a 5-hour stint of just playing a game. But I'm going to have to like eat and use the bathroom and, talk to my mother, talk to my friends. I have to interact with something. I'm not this one player in the game that's saving, this community, this galactic community. Go me with my laser guns and stuff. I'm saving this planet, and like, yeah, that feels good. But if I walk away from that game, does that game have any bearing, in fixing my mother dinner? No, it doesn't, because, but it was a feel good moment. It was, and in that moment, it did teach me something. It's like, hey, how can I build this kind of sense of accomplishment, outside of this video game? That was fun. How can I continue to find myself accomplished and fun? So this idea that you're talking about, of separating who we are as humans, as if that is all that we are. That's the only thing that we are. And that the other thing is that, as a human, it's humans against other things, right? Because if you're, a certain kind of a being, just because you're human now doesn't mean you're not this certain kind of being over here. And if you're, as a human, saying, we're against these beings, well, hello, you're saying you're against yourself? When you look at it, when you pull it out from this bigger perspective, because we think of our human lives as the defining reality, when it's not. And there's more and more, studies into consciousness, into realities. And when you listen to even remote viewers, who have, their procedures on how to do remote viewing, and they, and their accuracy levels. And then when you look at AI and, AI and intelligence and that kind, and then when you look at beings, there's, within our government, they're even saying, even though they don't want to admit it out loud to everybody, but there's like different types of beings. There could be interdimensional beings. There could be just regular physical beings. They don't know. They're saying they don't know. They just know that it's happening. They can't fully define it, or at least they're not fully disclosing it to the public right now. So even they are saying that there's different types of beings. And so understanding yourself as in this human concept, yeah, right now we're human. Therefore, going on to a little of my own personal sort of spiritual thing is with Mikha'el, he's coming here for a specific purpose, to help this movement of healing as best as humans will allow it to happen. And so he's coming here with a mission and an agenda. I just lost my train of thought, because I all of a sudden I started seeing stuff, and then
no issues. And just for our viewers, to just so they understand as well, Alice tends to receive information sometimes sporadically, and there are some insights obviously that come along with that. So Alice, if there's any point in time where that happens, you feel like there's a message, some sort of information you want to share, please feel free to do so.
That it was coming through this whole Mikha'el thing. That's why I kind of like got, what am I saying? Because it was almost like we were kind of keeping it in a certain way, which, again, that's probably where I wanted to. But there is this thing about Mikha'el, and he's here for a specific purpose and a mission to help humanity. Well, his primary goal is to pave the way for some global, which, I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's a global emanation of divine consciousness. And again, I'm trying to say hello to myself, and what was my point? Because so he has his own agenda, and so, like, our group, I wanted to finish the question. See, sometimes this is what's frustrating, is like, I, as Alice, wanted to finish up my train of thought before I jumped to something else, and now something else. Okay, so let me just say hello. Say hello to my own frustration. Okay, so what is happening here? So yeah, he has. See, I'm still not doing it.
No, and please feel free to channel whatever message it is that you're receiving. Take your time. Again, for our viewers, Alice has moments where she receives information, she receives insights, and I encourage her to share whatever it is that she's receiving, should that be something that she feels would be best.
So, all right. So, see, this is a me moment. In a way, I'm kind of resisting. There is something that kind of wants to come through. Just as a, well, I'm not going to define what the message is. If it wants to come through, then I should allow it. So, okay. So, am I doing this? This is sort of embarrassing. All right. Yeah.
No issues. Take however much time you need, Alice.
Yeah, I just need a moment to understand
Absolutely.
what's happening.
Please.
And what's going on, and
No
am I
issues.
standing in my own way?
No issues. I'll stay quiet. You process whatever you need to.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I am getting, so but I do want to make sure it's, well, hello. Yeah, so what I'm getting, and I do want to preface it. So Mikha'el wants to come forward, I guess, to just state something, maybe
Please.
offer a question, um, but I'm just going to say hello to my own protections, and I just want to say hello to Anubis, and because usually with something like this, I have a circle member with me, and so, but he has something, his vibration he wants to get out, so I'm just going to say hello and honor to this moment. Ah, yes. I am Mikha'el. And how should I address you?
You can call me Stu X. It is an absolute pleasure, complete understatement, by the way, to be in your presence.
It is an honor for me to be here and speak to you, Stu X. Thank you for being open and allowing this message. I wish to say, and it is part of my ongoing declaration, that yes, I am in this moment, in this vessel, the Archangel Michael, the one known as the Archangel Michael. I am incarnated in this vessel. Although I do prefer the name Mikha'el in these interactions, I am coming forth, one, to state that out loud, and two, to also say that yes, I do have an agenda. There is a reason why I've chosen this vessel and why I've chosen this time to come forward. There will be a heralding in of divine consciousness, relatively, at some point in the future, soon rather than later. There is an awakening that is happening. Part of my reason for being here is to prepare the way for this emanation of divine consciousness that will be global. It will affect everyone, and everyone will be presented with a choice. It is whether they can see that choice, whether they can see within themselves, within their own heart center, to understand the choice that is presented to them. We are here on behalf of the planet, who is sister to me. She is divine. She is the feminine divine embodied in the planet. And she is allowing humanity room to choose. But there is such that is happening that it is detrimental to this planet. And as a part of the conference of greater beings, as a part of the agenda that we have, the mission that we have decided must happen, I have come here to intervene in what could be the destruction of the planet. And where humanity stands on that is for humanity's choice. We come here to develop amplification centers so that more of those who are here can find their way to the appropriate choice when it so happens, to find themselves in connection to divine spirit and to oneness, to know who they truly are, to at least see, to begin to see the speck of who they are. This is what is important. It is not to say that they must all obtain enlightenment as if they are all masters, no. But they must see within themselves, within their own heart centers, begin to align themselves within love and compassion for themselves and therefore for others. Do you have a question in this moment?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for sharing what you feel is the most important aspect that humanity needs to focus on at the moment. I'm curious as to what events you foresee that will give us these decisions to make, if there are events on a larger scale, which will give us the opportunities to make these decisions. Is there something that we should be on the lookout for as far as global events, these sorts of things? And where do you see humanity going? What are kind of the different outcomes that are possibilities?
Yes. Individuals in this time, or in most times, I will say this, as individuals, as you manifest here on this planet as a human, you can obtain ascension. You can go through enlightenment. You can choose to come back and help others gain enlightenment. But what is needed now is the earth is moving through a process of ascension for herself, through the planet as a physical being, which means humanity as a part, an integral part of the planet. For you are the planet. You are a part of her, as if you are a cell within her or an organ within her. Humanity as a collective is being asked to ascend. And right now, there are forces that are aligning to keep the planet and therefore humanity in a certain type of stasis. So it is important that each person, as best they can, can begin their inward journey or continue their inward journey so that they understand their own sense of agency and create a clarity around them. For when part of the emanation will be a question of, will you allow us to support you as greater beings? And as greater beings, we are not internet dimensional beings. We are not galactic beings. We are primordial. We are close to Source. So as I speak to you now, I am direct with divine Source and oneness and consciousness. Now, how this emanation will appear will be different for each one, but it will be a global phenomenon. And how much human collective consciousness, or when it can ascend, is how fast others can look to themselves to understand their own sense of not greatness, to understand their wholeness, to even look to see, so that they can hear the question of, can we help? For you must ask. That is the important thing. We, as greater beings, also operate on what you would say is permission. We cannot interfere unless you say yes, unless you recognize us, unless you see us, unless you see yourself as connected to us in some way. If you refuse our help, we cannot help you. We cannot force you. For if we force a healing, we are no better than those who manipulate for power over and wish to take away your sense of agency. In moving through, in healing human collective consciousness, certain social structures and paradigms will need to dissolve. And that in of itself will not be easy for humanity to move through. And in some ways it will dissolve whether humanity makes the choice or not. But if you can be more proactive as a collective, if you can understand within yourself that this will happen regardless, then it will save much suffering. It will save much harm that will be done in the process of the dissolution of these structures. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And I suppose my follow-up to that would be, what what structures do you foresee us having to to change out of understanding, but also having to sort of get through, given the inherent challenges that much of humanity may face with those structures changing? Um, can you give us an idea as to which structures these are, how we can possibly prepare ourselves either externally or internally, as you just mentioned, but particularly what are these structures that most likely will cease a great deal of transformation, if not complete collapse?
Yes, there are two specific ones, but there are many that I will speak to these two in this moment. One is the economic structures, the way that capitalism has defined humanity's life. In so many ways, it rapes an individual's sense of who they are. It forces them to be a part of a collective that is how should I say, it forces an individualization that pits them in a cell where they are plugged into something that serves something other than the harmony of the greater whole. Their sense of who they are is trivialized, and their focus on what is success is manipulated for others. This way, this economic system, as it is called, is not sustainable. The other one I would mention is right relationship with the planet. Understanding your sense of humanness in connection to your environment. That just as you are spirit in oneness with all that is, your humanness is in oneness with the planet in this physical realm, and that it should not be a power over dynamic. Humans who view themselves, coining the phrase, top of the food chain, instead of working with, in right relationship with the planet. Seeing a power over structure, that they can do what they will, they can take what they want, that they do not have to ask for permission. Part of the indigenous cultures learned that you work with the environment, and as you work with the environment will provide, for the earth will provide. In working with and asking permission of honoring all that is around you, that there can be a give and take for everything. And so it is not, and I would also say in understanding relationship with the planet, it is not only humans at certain points that can be out of control. This is what it means to be in right relationship, to be in balance. For one system within the planet can go out of balance, and then another system will rise up to help realignment. Humans can be such a force for helping the realignment of balance, but they have to understand where they fit in the nature of the ecosystem or the biosphere of the entire planet. And they must understand that their actions are as if they are cancer to the planet, that they are in relationship with and not in a power over dynamic. When humans, as a collective, can be in alignment with this, and it does not mean that every single human must feel this way, but there is a tipping point. The tipping point, so that the dynamic of the energetic is overall in right relationship with the planet. And that those who are still in their process of understanding have a structure of support to being more in alignment with right relationship, instead of the pathology that is happening now, as if the cancer is running rampant and metastasizing across the entire body. And so those two things right now, initially, I would say are important to pay attention to, important to understand. In understanding right relationship with the planet, it guides you to understanding yourself, which is also important and key.
Thank you so much. You mentioned earlier of your deep rooted connection to Mother Earth.
Yes.
And I'm also curious, what does she have to say about what's happening? I would love to get her take as well.
Yes. She is in love with humanity. And she is so forgiving and open and wanting what is best. It is she that says, I will go as far as I can to the brink of death to give humanity a chance to ascend. She wants nothing more than to continue to see the beauty and creativity and work in relationship and in harmony with humanity. It is a part of her. In a way, it's as if you're asking or you're saying there is a part of her that is sick. She does not wish to lose it. It is important to her. It is a part of her overall identity. But she also will make a choice as to what is best. She will allow us, as the Conference of Greater Beings, to help her heal. And as those forces seek to harness and entrap the planet for their own purposes, we will not allow that to happen. But whether humanity is on board and allows us to help them, for again, humanity is special and significant. And because they are special and significant, humanity has to allow us to help themselves, allow us to help them, just as the planet gives us permission to help her. Humanity, which is very specific, needs to give us permission to help them, to help humanity. And if they do not see, if they are so busy with the noise that they dismiss the choice, they cannot hear the choice. This is the issue then. And this is what I'm working towards now in this incarnation, is to help amplify and clear away some of the toxic noise so that more of humanity can see who they really are, can understand their relationship with the planet, can hear the choice when it is eventually given to them. And with that, I should leave or move back. I will say, honor to you, Stu X, for allowing this emergence. Blessings and deepest love to you.
Thank you so much for your presence, for your being here.
You're very welcome.
How do you feel after that? I've noticed that you just took a drink of water. You clearly seem like that took, a good amount out of you. What's your experience like when you have such powerful energies, transmitting through you?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. One is just kind of coming back. I'm kind of my sense of Aliceness kind of gets pushed back a little bit while Mikha'el kind of emerges up. And so I don't want to say there's a disorientation, but there's a bit of like, all right, that just happened. And okay, so how do I just be here now? And I'm Alice in this moment, and just kind of ground and settle.
Do you recall?
It's like more like a dream. So that, what happens is that in the moment, I'm experiencing or hearing everything that's being said, but as I come out of it, I lose. So it's like a dream. I lose what was exactly said. Although sometimes, people can repeat something back and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. Um,
Wow.
um, he's Mikha'el, so technically he's a part. So his energetic, while powerful, I'm kind of used to overall. It's more of a kind of an emotional, I just did this in public kind of thing,
Wow.
on kind of on the fly. So it's, a
Right.
lot of it's me and then
Right.
just kind of getting settled back in.
Sure.
But when I do, like with Ganesha or some other beings, that because there's a difference, he is actually emerging in me, out of me. He's always here, and and he becomes emergent, what we call emergent. Then there are times, specific times, when we have events that it's an embodiment. And an embodiment is when a greater being comes actually, and both Mikha'el and me kind of move aside out of the body or off to the side to allow another greater being to come in and be embodied in me. So, in that sense, I'm not channeling anything. Nothing is coming from me from outside. Mikha'el is coming emergent, but there are embodiments where something is actually coming inside and being fully embodied in me. But that is different from a channeling. So I have moments where I channel something, and that, like Akashic Records, or I don't know, I recently a spiritual lineage was speaking through me for somebody. And that's a channeling. That's more like I'm a speakerphone. That's how I kind of
Interesting.
that's kind of how I see it. It's like a channeling is more like a speakerphone, where I'm kind of more Alice still. Although if it's powerful enough, it kind of takes over in totality. But I can't move. Like the difference, a good difference is that, like with Mikha'el, he moves, he can walk up and down, he's embodied. And even if somebody, with the embodiments, they're in me, it's like they've possessed me. I'm walking around, or they have full control of all that I am. With a channeling, they don't have full control.
Interesting.
They're speaking, it's like a channel, it's like coming down and coming out through me, and they don't have control, or whatever it is does not have full control of my body. In fact, sometimes it's uncomfortable, because if it's powerful enough, a lot of times I'll be in a position that's uncomfortable, like, I'm talking like this, and this is a channeling, a blah 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 blah, and my head, it hurts when I come back because it gets
Your
stiff.
body language really changed quite a bit. In fact, even the expression on your face almost looked different just because of what you said. Really, we don't realize just how much our energetic influence, how far it extends into these sorts of things, such as our expression, our appearance, and various sorts of things. So when there is a different energy, a different presence inside the body, it can be reflected in various ways. And I just found it interesting that it almost looked like your face changed. That's almost how it's almost one of the things that I perceived, along with
I
the
had my
changes in your body
brother tell
language.
me, it's funny because, like I said, I don't want to say I'm just getting used to it, but in a way, I'm just getting used to all this stuff. And like I said, I went through my doubts, like, really, I'm making it up. Don't believe me. I'm just acting, But I had my brother one time, like, he didn't know what to expect. And he saw me one time, in this, and he says, wow, that is not my sister. That is not my sister. And I'm like, really? It's that different? And they're like, yeah, it totally is different.
Yeah.
And I'm told that with each different, like Ganesha, like I said, he was the most recent one. He's totally different. The How they see him, and there's a couple of different greater beings that become emergent through me. They are all very different in personality, and I'm told the face. I'm told that they're, because I'm thinking it's just me. It's like, no, Alice, it's In fact, Lisa Christie, who is part of the circle, she
It's
every
also on
once
the
in a
show,
while
also a
she
series.
will say, or she thinks like she's talking to one of the greater beings, and then it's reminding her of something maybe her and I talked about, and it's almost like she wants to turn to her side and say, Alice, did you hear this? And it's like Alice is not there because Alice is right, Alice's body is right in front of her, but she has these like moments, she says, that it's almost like, because she's so, everybody is so, they're talking to the greater being, it's like I'm not there. And 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 it's like, where's Alice? And it's like, oh.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting. Like I said,
Absolutely.
it's it's a thing.
Let
It's
me
a-
ask you this: what's the difference between incarnating and becoming, I guess, emergent? So does that kind of allow for more flexibility, I suppose, energetically? So you can sort of do what you need to outside of that physical vessel, but then when time comes to interact with this physical plane, that sort of being becomes emergent. Or how would you describe
so,
the difference between
so what
like
I will
archangel
say, yeah.
emergent?
So
Yes.
my understanding, and again, this is kind of going up against some of my edges here
Hmm.
in just being, accept, not. I'm working on my own acceptance
Hmm.
because it's hard for me. Um, what I understand is that I am actually me. I am actually the Archangel Michael. But what's happened is that I have this personality of Alice. So that's the immediacy of the day to day of walking around, of going to school, growing up, yada, yada. That is the Alice part. And I mean, there's more to it because there's some other stuff to it. But
Yeah.
basically, there's, so that's the Aliceness, and my Aliceness serves as a way to be the immediacy of knowing what it's like to live in this time. And so what happens is that basically Mikha'el is my higher self. So what's happening is that it's not like you're not talking to him right now, in a way. This is his interpretation of being in this Alice body, I guess. And so, but as a higher self, he has access to the biggerness of the picture of what, of whatever's going on. And so and then I'll say this, most, as I understand it, in what I know, is that most people, when they incarnate, most beings, as they incarnate here, they actually incarnate asleep as the higher self. And so part of the process of sort of being here and gaining enlightenment, and waking up, is to wake up your higher self. And so that you have access to your higher self. Well, Mikha'el, because of mission and stuff and whatever is going on, he has decided, or he decided when he incarnated here, he's going to already be awake, which is not a very comfortable thing to do. But he wanted to be more aware, so I guess if I started going off on a wrong path, or I don't know, he could like shepherd me, or I don't know, you know. But that's, so he's been awake since the time my conception happened. Again, this is my information. And so basically, in this scenario with him, he's, I, as Alice, as a human, I have my own filter and ways of understanding things and how I interact, and my own personality, based on, I don't know, genetics, body stuff, experiential, my experiences in my life. So he will come through. That's him coming through. It's like, okay, now as a higher self, I'm going to come through and more directly relate, because he also brings the energetic of that. So he brings in the emanation, his voice. When the greater beings speak, they're not just speaking for the words, like, understand their tone. as they're speaking, there's an emanation of
Yes.
vibration. So, not to say it doesn't matter what they say, but in some way, they're just, what the words are not all that they're saying. That's why they want to, it's not just enough sometimes for me to speak it. Sometimes they want to come through specifically to speak into the energetic of it in their own specific way.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Oh wow. And are you familiar with RJ Spina? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. RJ Spina.
I'm not sure.
Okay. He actually one of the so he wrote a couple of books. One particularly about healing. The other others are about being and insights that he himself shares. And one of the things that he said about greater beings, and particularly incarnating into this world, was a greater being may have more than one incarnation at a time. Also, that greater being can incarnate in different times as well. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Is that also something that you understand to be in kind of um, in works over here in your situation? How
You
how
know,
does that play into your situation? I'm curious.
that's a good question.
And because I can imagine in your situation, it isn't exactly an incarnation either, as you mentioned. It's an emergence, which is
Well, the
from what I heard.
emergence. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, just from my
Yeah,
understanding,
yeah.
they
So,
were slightly
like,
different. Yeah,
the Well, like I said, it's an
it is
incarnation
an
because
incarnation, right?
he's incarnating in physical form, you know, as me. So he he decided, like, just like you're being, whoever you are as a being, decided, I'm going to incarnate as Stu in this lifetime. So I'm picking this situation and context, and I'm going to incarnate here. So that's what he does. That's what he did. He incarnated, as I understand it, in me. Now, this is where, um, I don't know. I have other specific kinds of information, and so I also understand that because when I speak of greater beings, I'm speaking of primordial beings that are beyond all realms, that are like what I call beyond. And but because they're greater beings not because they're great. Go you. It's more like they're vast and they're primordial. They're like they're the first beings that sort of individuated out of existence. Okay. So my understanding, and this is my understanding, is that the conference of greater beings, which are these primordial beings, have said, oh, there's a disturbance in the force down here on earth. We need to do a direct intervention or something. Okay. Now, when did they decide that? How did they decide that? I don't know. But they tend to operate, as like, again, as I understand it, through avatars and derivatives of themselves. So because it's hard, it's difficult, it's not an easy thing for a greater being to come all the way down and to incarnate. It's not easy. Usually what happens is they have derivatives of themselves or avatars of themselves that can more directly, or they have, like, angelic beings that are helper beings that go around and help provide messages and things like that to interact in this way. But because of something that's going on in this particular era, and there's something with the planet and something with all this stuff going on, they've decided they want to come here directly and not go through normal avatars and normal, derivatives of themselves, because it's like, Mikha'el is channeled all over the place. And but and there are some beings, as I understand it, who kind of usurp that, which is why he wants to be known right now in this interaction as Mikha'el. Because a lot of times, if you say Archangel Michael, there are other types of being who are representing him in a way that can be inappropriate. So so he is coming down like himself in a very direct fashion. And again, anybody can say, no, Alice, that's not how we understand the universe. It's like, okay, well, that's free for you to send. This is the information I'm getting. And this is my truth. So sometimes I can get a little bit, I'm trying to, I don't want to force my truth on anybody else, but sometimes people try to frame their understanding of things and angels and universe, cosmological view of deities or greater beings or whatever. And they kind of try to say, no, Alice, it's like, no, I'm telling you, this is my experience. This is my knowing. This is my truth. And I don't want to tell you what to believe. I don't. You can believe what you want, but you can't tell me what my information is. And this is my information. So you can choose to go with that, or you don't have to.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to note that anyone on the sort of path that you're on values with, I would say, probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably at the top of the list would be honesty and being honest with oneself in particular, so that one can actually understand, like you mentioned several times before, what we are internally going through, what we're receiving versus what we're creating. And this sort of honesty is really what takes us to that point of having the clarity to see what am I interacting with, what is my situation, and that intent, which we also talked about earlier, is clear. It's hey, I'm going to spread love, I'm going to spread compassion. Simple as that. Not only are we going to grow, but we're going to do it in a way which we enjoy. It's simple. And so it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Let me ask you this: so there's a difference between channeling what is referred to as Archangel Michael versus Mikha'el. Does Mikha'el get channeled as well? And if so, what is your experience of that when he is being channeled?
Well, I mean, other people can channel his information. Mm-hmm. They have, some people have access directly to channeling him, and he is a vast being. He holds again, in my language, he holds all of angelic realms. So and he is, he has his own monikers. He's the hand of the divine and all this stuff. And so, that he can operate at multiple levels, yes. That he's incarnated through me is very specific. Now, is there somebody else who's going to claim that? Maybe, I don't know. And, but I have he's here for a specific purpose. And this is the agenda that, so I'm following this lead that he's told me as my higher self, this is what we're going to be doing. Or, I mean, he doesn't really lay it out, like, because I don't know. Well, that's not true. In some ways I do know, but the thing of it, he's not laying out a detailed plan. Part of this whole thing is just like with everybody else. I need to say yes, because I can just freak out and say, screw this. I'm blowing this popsicle stand. I'm not doing this. This is too much. This is ridiculous. I can go into that. And I have actually. There have been moments when I'm like, what would it take for me to not, to maybe recap my knowledge or go back into to go back into this other way of living. Because sometimes this isn't easy. This isn't easy. This isn't like, oh wow, I get, psychic abilities and yay, it's like, no, this
It's a
stuff
lot of information.
I'm looking at information.
Oh,
I'm looking at lots of like malevolent forces also. It's not just all light and rainbows, right? Although that's the goal, is to just is the goal isn't to be in light and rainbows all the time, but it's to, how do you say it? It's to, because you'll always go through pain. There's always tension. There's always something. The goal is to how quickly, as your intention or something, you go back to peace. That is the goal. Because you can't, in order to evolve, you're going to need the tension anyway. You can't just be in stasis. If you're in stasis about it, you're in corruption, actually.
wow.
You can't be in stasis. That's why this whole thing about, oh, there's a heaven and bliss and there's just angels forever and you're just happy for, it's like, no, that's stasis. That's corruption, actually. There's always going to be more that you can evolve to. There's always greater mysteries and greater sense of what can you create and experience. It's an infinite possibilities. And if you're only in one thing of being in heaven, it's like that doesn't grow. That doesn't allow you growth. But the point is, though, is how quickly through tension you can come back to peace, to harmony, to wanting greater alignment, to love and using the power of love and understanding compassion for others. That is the goal. And because when you can do that, no matter what is happening around you, you can always find your sense of center and peace and just being. And that will allow you to evolve even more beyond whatever it is we can even remotely think of.
There's a lot I want to unpack there as well, but let me say this, that I think it is it's also an indication of just where we are as as humanity, that these sorts of beings are coming in the way that you described, which is, you know, this is an important, very important fundamental era that we're a part of. And it is important that we get our intent straightened out. And it all starts from within us. And I think the more honest we are, and the
Yes.
more we look inwards and really address these whatever you want to call them, challenges, issues, so that we can heal, so that we can create the world that we want to be a part of, is of utmost significance. And it's clearly one of the reason that Mikha'el is here and has graced us with his presence in this particular lifetime here, is to show us the importance of finding the right way, being in our heart centers, and going towards that path of collective growth, as well as unity, liberation, and happiness. So I want to really thank you for being here, and I feel like I can continue on and on with you about these various topics. I actually wanted to get into 4D, 5D, space with you as well, meaning kind of the evolution towards that direction. I'm curious, just are there any thoughts you have on that? As I said, I could continue to speak to you for a few hours, but I'm just, for maybe that last bit before we close off, and then hopefully have you on again. Would love to just get into the evolution into that 4D, sort of space, or a subtle reality, I suppose, if you want to call it. And what would that mean as far as dealing with tension that you mentioned earlier? Would that tension still be there, or is it our intent at the end of the day that determines how our experience at the 4D level would go? Um, can you speak to that? Would
I
there
can
be
speak
tension?
to some of it,
Sure.
um, just really quickly, and this is an interesting point for me. Some of some of this stuff, like every being has their own specialty, and every I in a way I kind of liken it to um, uh, like a corporation, that's more relational and not in a hierarchical way. You have your CEO, which is has a mission, has a focus, and he is an expert in what he does. But does he know how to do the janitor stuff? Does he know what's going on in the mailroom? Right. So those who do the janitor stuff and do the mailroom, in this scenario, they are just as important, and they have their own expertise. It doesn't make them less than because one is a janitor or one is sorting mail, but they have their position, they have their expertise, and the CEO can't go into the mailroom or go into the janitor and say, you should start cleaning like this, and doing this product, or, they can give some guidance or they can give some preferences. Wouldn't it be nice if this was done like this? Or, can we see that cleaned or something? They can offer, but they can't tell the person what is better to do. That's their expertise. That's them. And when you respect that and you honor that, this is uh, so. But again, what does that person need in order to do their job? Do they need to know all the financial dealings between, an international corporation? Do they need that level of knowledge? No. But does the CEO corporation need to know what cleaning products that the janitor needs to do? No. So, but he can gain, each one can have a generalized sense of it. That being said, what I find is interesting for myself is that when it comes to a lot of this talk about 4D, 5D stuff, and these levels of dimensions, some of that resonates, and I can tap into some of that. But from my perspective, and this is my truth, that I try to understand it, but my perspective goes so far out that sometimes it's like looking, it's like I'm it's like I'm at a 10-story building and I'm trying to see the cracks in the sidewalk. I know the cracks are there, and say I know it needs to be changed, or I know something needs to happen, but I need somebody else. There's a person who's down on that level that can tell me more about that, because that's their expertise. And so when it comes to, so what happens in this talk of this, the 5D, what I see when I look at that is I just see kind of a kaleidoscope of stuff. I It's harder for me to drill into what does 5D mean, what does 4D mean, what does all this stuff mean, because I just see it as a nice like rainbow of kaleidoscope, and I see it as a bandwidth like this, and then I see all this other stuff over here. I see all these like realms. I see other stuff, and people keep saying, "Oh, but this is the top," and I'm like, "That's not what because I'm seeing all this other stuff." Now that doesn't make my information more privileged. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, and it doesn't make me, "Oh, you don't know about 5D." I have to just say hello to that for myself, because I want to say, well, shouldn't I know everything if I make a, it's like I can gain access to that, but is that my expertise? No. I'm out here and that doesn't mean I'm better than anybody else, or it just means this is where my perspective comes from. And if I try to drill down into that, I tend to rely on somebody else's information and then see how it works with my information. So that being said, though, so I tend to see it as either you're ascending or you're not ascending. I don't see these different, I mean, it's not that I can't distinguish it. I can see the variations, but they're not very distinct for me. I just see it as is human, and I just see it as human collective consciousness. That's the other thing. It's harder for me to individualize unless I'm speaking to a specific person. It's hard for me to individualize people because that's not my perspective. I immediately can see human collective consciousness. Immediately. I see the planet. I can see, I have access to the planet and that collective. I have access to the collective of the planet. But like, just because I have access to the planet, I'm not a plant whisperer. But can I talk to plants? Can plants, but I see guardians more. So if there's a guardian of a certain space, I can talk to the guardian of that space. But my forte, I'm not a plant whisperer. I'm not a crystal whisperer. But can I get information? Yes. But so I don't know if that's going on and on too much, but the essence, how one gets there. So this is where going to certain people, who have more knowledge and in-depth. So like for an instance, and maybe this is the general answer to your question, or a question. Mikha'el is here not to tell other light workers how to do their stuff. His main reason for being here is to support light workers so that one, they're guided, they don't go off path, that they can find their own support and then do what they do. So what I do doesn't replace or change anything that anybody else is saying necessarily. It's to help bring up the level of vibration so that
Absolutely.
we're all operating from the same relative page, and that they can more fully feel supported in what is their gifts and what they do, so that they can help tip human collective consciousness over to healing. And so does that answer the question? I can, again.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's anything that you've said which I feel has really gone against some of the other wise masters that I often, often follow, meaning listen to, take insights from, receive transmissions from, and so I think a lot of what you said resonates with folks who are kind of knowledgeable about the subject, and at the same time want to kind of look into how they can further progress. So yeah, just my own take. I don't think that there's anything um, that goes against anything that I've understood from some of these incredibly evolved beings. So thank you so much. And as I mentioned, especially with what you said about what you see with regards to 4D, 5D realities, as well as different realms that you may be seeing as well. I think that's also an entire topic of its own, which would love to cover with you at some point. Of course, now we're kind of getting to that point where it might make sense to just close out for the day. But
Right.
before we do that, I would love for our viewers and listeners to just have an understanding of what you're currently working on, what are your plans, and where can we find out more about all of this and the services that you provide. I'm going to be including links and information in the description as well. So don't worry if there's something that you want to add later. But I'm just curious, what's going on?
Well, right now, my main, not used to, I still have my own sort of private, what I call my Alice healing practice, where I do readings, energy readings. And that's a very different space for me. I go into what I call an Alice reading space. I go, and I close my eyes and then I look at somebody's energy and then I ask permission. And that's based on Psychic Horizon tools. But that is kind of, I'm not, that is kind of being squeezed out a bit. And I don't want to say squeezed out, but what's happening is things are morphing into focusing on circle work, what I call, and working with a team of women. Right now, they're women. It doesn't have to be women, but I'm working with a circle of women, and so that are doing these events. Or doing circle work in alignment with Mikha'el's agenda. And so that involves some ritual, that involves creating events. We consider them sacred, but it's very non-denominational. We don't say we're experts in anything. We happen to we have a lot of connections with Hindu and Egyptian gods, but that's by no means as if we're starting a church or anything. What we're doing is a lot of the involvement in being in our circle is a healing work for ourselves. And then as we heal, we gain more understanding about the fuller agenda. So, the circle will eventually do more sort of ritual work, for land stuff, for communities, things like that. And we eventually want to get to a point where we establish a nonprofit. We haven't done that yet, but we want to get to a point where we're establishing a nonprofit so that we can do collaborations with different types of groups. Again, it doesn't have to be, certain, we only work with these spiritual groups. It can be anything. Okay. As long as it's in alignment with love, compassion, harmony, and healing of collective consciousness, that's where we're going. So that being said, if anybody's interested, then they should, our website is very rough right now because I'm the only person who can do a website and I don't have the brainwidth. So it's very extremely bare bones at the moment. But on our website page, it kind of explains about us. If you go to our call, and then you can subscribe to our email list. And we try to do events once a month, public events once a month. So, if you subscribe, you'll get our letter. It's every once in a while we'll put out a newsletter, but not a lot. Again, we have a lot of ways we want to establish like a blog, and we have a Twitter account, although it's X now. Anyway, so I would encourage anyone who's interested to attend one of our events, and you can find out about our events by subscribing to our email list.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to include all the information in the description as well, so people are more easily directed to those some of those destinations. I encourage people as well to look into what Alice is doing. She's doing some phenomenal work, and she's dealing with some, divine energy. Really is the best way to put it, and very much it would be very much worth your time to gain the insights and the transmission, really, that that is kind of coming through her, as well as the circle of others that she works with. Can't thank you enough for your time, for the fact that Archangel Mikha'el actually was embodied today during our discussion. It was more than a pleasure. It was an absolute honor and privilege to be in his presence and to learn so much from you. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing what you do and being who you choose to be. I think it's needed now more than ever, and I really hope to have you back on again. It has been a beautiful experience, and thank you once again, Ellis.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor to be here, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you also, you know, for being who you are, because your openness and your willing to receive makes it very comfortable to be here. So thank you.
My pleasure, and that means a lot. Thank you so much for saying that, and I really look forward to having you on again, Alice. Thank you so much.